Good afternoon everyone and welcome to the ordinary meeting of Wingecarribee Shire Council on the 20th of July. I remind all present mobile phones must be switched off. The meeting is being live streamed. Acknowledgement of country. Wingecarribee Shire Council acknowledge the Gurungara and Thorowal people as the traditional custodians of this land we now call Wingecarribee Shire. I pay my respect to elders, both past, present and emerging. I'd also like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders present here today or watching. Statement of ethical obligations. As Administrator, I will undertake the duties of the Office of Administrator in the best interest of the people of the Wingecarribee Shire area and to act faithfully and impartially carry out the functions, powers, authorities and discretions vested in me under the Local Government Act 1993 or any other act to the best of my ability and judgment. I am committed to the declaration of conflicts of interest in relation to items listed for consideration on the agenda or which are considered at this meeting in accordance with the Code of Conduct. General Manager, apologies. Obviously there's none. Sorry. And if I could welcome John McFadden to his first meeting of the Council. John's the Acting Director of Community and Place, and thanks for helping us out for the next few months. Adoption of minutes. I would move that the minutes of the ordinary meeting of Council held on Wednesday 15 June be adopted as a correct record of the proceedings and declare that carried. I'd now move that the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of Council held on Wednesday 29 June be adopted as a correct record of the proceedings of the meeting and declare that carried. General Manager, are there any declarations of interest?
There are no declarations, Mr. May.
I have 1 minute. On Thursday, 14 July 2022, the Governor of New South Wales accepted the recommendation of the Minister for Local Government and declared all offices in relation to Wingecarribee Shire Council vacant and appointed me as Administrator. A copy of the proclamation is attached to this minute for the record. Residents will be aware that the former Minister for Local Government had ordered a public inquiry on 1 August 2021 into the Council and appointed Ross Glover as Commissioner. The public hearings were all conducted in these chambers and webcast in March and April this year. Commissioner Glover's report, dated 30 June 2022, was recently received by the Minister and has been tabled in the New South Wales State Parliament and will be attached to this minute for the record. In accepting the key recommendation that all offices be declared vacant, the Minister also notified that elections for the new Wingecarribee Shire councillors will be held on 14 September 2024, aligning with the ordinary council elections for New South Wales. A number of recommendations in Mr Glover's report are industry-based, with the Minister indicating she will consider them in due course. Accepting that it is very comprehensive, I have no further comment to offer on the report, but would urge residents to take the time to review its contents, which clearly outlines the reasoning behind the Minister's decision. The time has now come for us all to move forward for the sake of the future of this Shire. Community engagement is core to rebuilding of trust and connections in our community and with other key stakeholders. Council has already commenced a range of consultations, most notably my visits to villages and towns, the executive listening tours, consultations associated with the Mossvale bypass, classifying and the Robinson Place Plan. There is a need to provide an ongoing structure for the community to participate in local decision making and be engaged with projects in their place. I've asked the General Manager to bring a report back to Council no later than the September meeting cycle on structures that can be put in place to enable this. Council is presently playing what I would best describe as catch-up in the strategic land use planning area and endeavouring to make it easier for residents to deal with the Council when they seek alterations or want to build a new home on their land. Residents should not have to fight their neighbours and battle the Council for approvals. Council staff are working hard with consultants to provide better guidelines, in effect development control plans, to assist. Consistency in outcome is required and too much money is wasted on ambit claims, and we need a system that, in short, allows follow the rules and get an approval. There will be considerable consultations with residents with both high-level land use planning and what I call mum and dad applications to ensure the community's expectations are both heard and acknowledged. In addition to this, the Council Forward Financial Plan provides expenditure on new and renewal of existing structure of $500 million over the next 10 years, and we must have mechanisms in place to ensure that residents get both value for the money and what they actually want. In my view, the voice of the community must be heard both at the councillor or administrator level and by professional officers who actually do the hard yards in preparing the policies and reports for the governing body's consideration. The Community Strategic Plan is the guiding document for Council and drives the priorities of the Council. The review of this strategic document will be one of the first actions of the incoming Council post the 2024 elections. However, I am mindful that the current document is dated and will need to be refreshed to ensure that it is fit for purpose over the 2023-2024 financial year. As such, I've asked the General Manager to provide a report to the September meeting outlining an approach that will facilitate this. Together with the General Manager, I joined over 1,000 delegates from across the nation to attend the National Assembly of Local Government in Canberra from 19 to the 22nd of June. Sunday commenced with a regional forum with speakers from the Minderoo Foundation speaking on fire and flood resilience initiatives, as well as a range of other speakers in topics such as leadership during uncertain climate, regional housing and population strategies, and regional tourism post-pandemic. All of these topics are very relevant to the Southern Highlands. Both the content and calibre of speeches at the forum and the Assembly were first class. A key area of advocacy raised at the National Assembly was around the importance of the federal government's local roads and community infrastructure program. Since its inception, the program has provided over $3.8 million to our Shire and has delivered a range of works, which I won't read, but which I've outlined in the minute. I've asked the General Manager to write to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government, the Catherine King MP, and both federal members, highlighting the significant benefits delivered to local communities through this program and to advocate for its continuation. I've been approached by a local resident about the possible renaming of the Bowral Memorial Hall. To date, approximately $3.93 million has been spent on the project, with Council receiving a Commonwealth grant through the Building Better Nations Fund of $2.8 million. Users of the facility were recently given a site inspection of the work carried out, and I have now joined the member for Wallandilly, project staff and the contractor for a viewing. While I am loath to become involved in the possible renaming of the facility, and as I don't know the origins of the original name and the reasoning behind that, I have asked the General Manager to approach users and residents to see if there's any appetite for change. Unfortunately, I must report that Council has been unsuccessful in its endeavours to obtain a $5 million grant from the state government towards the upgrade and the internal reconstruction of the Mittagong Playhouse. That's the bad news, but the good news is that there will be other grant opportunities and Council officers will continue to pursue them. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the work of Marissa Rockamalera in her time at the Council. Marissa answered my call for assistance for 3 months and ended up staying over a year. Her contribution with getting the Council back on track and dealing with legacy issues in a reasonable way has been acknowledged to me by a number of residents. Marissa acted as the liaison between the Glover Inquiry and Council, and this assistance has been acknowledged in the final report. The assistance of Mr. Ian Fong and John Crawford is also acknowledged by Commissioner Glover. These gentlemen were behind the technology that allowed a flawless live streaming of the public hearings, which the report notes had almost 12,000 views across 15 days. I would move that the minute be noted and declare that carried. We now move on to matters listed for consideration. General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May. Before we start with the council reports, I would like to note that due to the timing of finalising the business paper and the announcement of the Minister last Thursday, in the reports you'll note that there are still references to the interim administrator and post the decision of the Minister that should now read administrator. And I'd also like to advise that we have COVID and the flu running through our organisation at the moment, so we have a few acting people here today to introduce items.
Okay, you get to have that recorded in the minutes? Yeah, thank you. Okay. The first item is the planning proposal for land at Yarra Road, Mossvale.
Thank you, Mr. May. The Exec Manager Strategic Outcomes will introduce this item. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, General Manager. So, Mr. May, this report relates to a planning proposal to rezone land at Yarrow Road in Mossvale. So the subject land immediately adjoins what is known as the Chelsea Gardens urban release area. It has quite a long planning history, is identified in the local housing strategy to be incorporated as part of that broader urban release area. So the planning proposal seeks to rezone the land to part R2 low density residential and part RE1 public recreation, consistent with the adjoining urban release area. By progressing the planning proposal now, it allows us to integrate the site into the broader urban release area in relation to the provision of infrastructure, the subdivision design. So the matter was considered at the local planning panel meeting on 6th of July. The local planning panel supported the staff recommendation to progress the planning proposal, however added some additional advice in relation to the preparation of a concept master plan which demonstrates how the site can be incorporated into that broader urban release area. So the recommendation in the report has been updated to reflect that advice provided by the local planning panel.
Thanks for that. It's my understanding that you're going to issue a community update in relation to what's going on there, is that right? Or the General Manager is? Or?
Yeah, so through our weekly newsletter, we'll be providing an update to the community. We'll provide a project page on Council's website and a link through that newsletter back to the project page, just to make sure the community are aware of where the project is up to, as well as some of the changes that are being proposed as part of this process.
Well, that's a good idea. Not everyone subscribes to our newsletters, so can I suggest a press release or something as well, drawing people's attention to what is actually going on, if you don't mind. Okay, thanks for that. In relation to, I'm sorry, you said newsletter, which means you send it to people. They don't have to go to the website to have a look. Yeah,
so we have in the order of about 5,000 people who subscribe via email to our newsletter, so it goes out to that
5,000?
Yeah, I think it's in the order of about 5,000
Okay, well I take
people.
back what I said about a press release. I think if 5,000 newsletters, people don't know what's happening. Well, I think you're doing your best you can do. So I take that out of the back. You can do it if you want. I'm telling you how to suck eggs. Okay, in relation to item 8.1, I would move the officer's recommendation 1, 2 and 3 as outlined on page 9 of the business paper and declare that carried. Next item is adoption of the draft agency information guide. General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May. The Group Manager, Corporate and Community Services. Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you. Section 21 of the Government Information Public Access Act requires agencies to review their agency information guides and adopt a new agency information guide at least every 12 months. This report seeks the adoption of Council's agency information guide. The guide must describe the structure and functions of the agency. It should also describe the way in which the agency functions affect members of the public. It should specify any arrangements that exist to enable members of the public to participate in the formulation of the agency's policy and the exercise of the agency's functions. It also identifies various kinds of government information the agency holds and details on how to access this information. The information contained in the draft Agency Information Guide is substantially similar to the current Agency Information Guide, which is available on Council's website. It does include minor updates that have been made to sections concerning the roles of councillors and the Mayor to reflect that Council is in administration, also the new organisational structure and the review of Council committees.
Thanks for that. And I'm going to move number 3, but it's probably addressed by what the General Manager's already said, but just for the sake of clarity, I would like to move recommendation 1 and 2 and add a number 3. The guide be updated to accord with the Governor's proclamation, not declaration, dated 13 July 2022. If we can change declaration to proclamation, if you don't mind. That was quick. Thank you. Accordingly, in relation to item 9.1, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 43 of the business paper 1 and 2 with a new number 3. The guide be updated to accord with the Governor's proclamation dated 13 July 2022 and declare that carried. Next item is 9.2, draft grants, donations, etc. on page 67.
Thank you, Mr. May. Back to the Group Manager, Corporate and Community Services.
Thank you, General Manager. This report seeks approval for the public exhibition of the draft grants, donations and sponsorship policy. A review of the existing policy has been undertaken to ensure that policy gives due consideration to the sponsorship in public sector guidelines released by the Independent Commission Against Corruption. It has also been benchmarked against other New South Wales Council policies. The draft policy has also been updated to include Council's outgoing grants and incoming and outgoing donations and reflects that advertising by or on behalf of Council is now managed through the planning process. The draft policy provides a framework for the distribution of funds under Section 356 of the Local Government Act and outlines principles under which grants, donations and sponsorship arrangements should be undertaken. It's proposed that this draft policy be placed on public exhibition for 28 days and submissions be invited from the public.
Thank you for that. In relation to item 9.2, draft grants, donations and sponsorship policy, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 67 of the business paper 1 and 2 and declare that carried. 9.3, animal shelter.
Thank you, Mr. May. And back to the Group Manager, Corporate and Community Services.
Thank you. This report seeks acknowledgement of a gift from the estate of the late Audrey Prengnell in the sum of $2,000 and seeks a resolution to apply the gift for a specified purpose of the Wingecarribee Animal Shelter. External legal advice was sought, and it's confirmed no trust relationship was created by the bequest, and it is a gift for a specified purpose. The advice also confirmed the appropriate governance steps that council should take to use the funds for the purpose of the animal shelter. The proposed governance steps have also been communicated to the solicitor of the estate.
Thank you for that. In relation to item 9.3, the animal shelter bequest, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 83 of the business paper 1, 2 and 3 and declare that carried. 9.4, support for fire impacted businesses in Yarrow.
Yep, thank you, Mr. May. The Chief Information Officer will introduce this item in the Director's absence. Thank you.
Following the building fire on the 1st of July 2021 on the corner of Bong Bong Street and Winchcarrabee Streets, Barrel, the site has been secured and a construction hoarding installed. The hoarding was recently dressed with graphics designed to attract pedestrians to this part of the main street. However, the hoarding itself obstructs the vision of the stores either side. The fee waiver is proposed as an initiative to these stores to bring dining or product displays onto the footpath. This activation would be seen from the street corner and encourage shoppers to proceed along the street when they may otherwise be inclined not to walk beyond the hoarding.
Do the insurance company or whoever now has control of that site pay a rental for occupation of the footpath?
I can confirm they have been charged a fee for the hoarding.
But do they have to pay a rental for the occupation of the footpath?
I'll ask Mr McFadden to answer that if that's all right.
Mr May, there appears to be evidence of a fee in the order of $332.59 that has been paid in relation to the site, and that is in accordance with Council's fees and charges schedule.
So the intent of this recommendation, I know the area well. I walk up and down there quite a bit, probably early in the mornings. There aren't too many, if any, outdoor eating areas there, but this is to encourage those who can take advantage of that to do so.
That's correct, Mr May.
Good idea. Okay, thanks for that. In relation to item 9.4, support of fire impacted businesses in Yarra, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 85 of the business paper 1 and 2 and declare that carried. 9.5, desktop review of the council's special rate variation.
Thank you, Mr. May. So we have the Deputy Chief Financial Officer in the CFO's absence. Thank you.
Mr May, the purpose of this report is to advise Council of the outcomes of the desktop review of Council's 2020/21 financial performance and asset management against the Fit for the Future and special rating variation submissions. The review concludes that all financial performance and asset management indicators were met by Council by 30 June 2021. The review also found that Council has complied with the accounting standards regarding asset revaluations, and there have been no issues raised by the Audit Office of New South Wales as part of their annual audits relating to asset valuations. The review also noted opportunities for improvement, and we are dedicated to ensuring the data on our assets is maintained to meet best practice standards. Council is forecast to spend over $500 million in the next 10 years on infrastructure, and an emphasis on updating systems and controls can help to ensure that these funds are allocated effectively. In this regard, the review recommends that the Asset Accounting Operational Management Standard be updated to ensure that long-term asset planning projections continue to align with the proposed asset management practices. The Council officers provide a further report on the costings and options for an integrated financial and asset management system, and the Council officers provide a further report on the costings and options for a strategic asset reporting system. Actioning these recommendations will ensure greater transparency in reporting on Council's financial performance and facilitate sound asset management.
Thanks very much for that. It's opportune that this report comes to this meeting because it puts to bed another issue which has been raised with me ad nauseum about the special rate increase that or special rate variation the council had several years ago, and this confirms that the council has acted appropriately in expenditure of that money, which is good news, and it puts to bed a lot of what people have been saying. We dealt with the question of the environmental levy a lot earlier with the Finch report, but this was a bigger issue. Can you tell me, during the term of the special rate variation, what was the net increase in rates? In other words, the special rate variation of 43, whatever it is, that includes the allowance at the rate peg, and residents don't or some residents who have raised with me don't acknowledge that fact. They just say that it was an extraordinary increase. So, do you know what the net increase was?
So the net increase above the rate peg as a percentage is 36.74%.
36.74.
Above rate peg.
Yeah. There are lessons to be learnt in this, in the report, and it's a constructive report. That's the whole idea of it. Is it fair to say that the council, in its decision making during Fit for the Future and in going for the special rate variation, relied on valuations that may or may not have been, you can't get them 100% correct, but they relied on valuations that you're now suggesting, or this report now suggests, there needs to be more vigour in them. Is that unfair or fair?
Oh, I think, well, we have a revaluation cycle of around 5 years for each asset class. I think we're looking to implement a more frequent recycle timeframe, particularly around roads, given the damage to them more recently with the floods. But most of our assets are valued by independent external valuers, so they use their tried and tested methodology, and the methodology is endorsed by the Audit Office of New South Wales.
Mm-hmm. I'll repeat the last bit.
The methodology used by the valuers is accepted by the Audit Office of New South Wales when they do their audits.
But look, I don't want to ask you unfair questions, because I think you've been very careful how you've answered already, with respect. But there are no guidelines issued by OLG or the Audit Office in how these valuations are to be undertaken. So from council to council, from valuer to valuer, there's an opportunity for that to vary.
That's correct.
Okay, thanks. As I say, I'm very happy with this because it puts to bed concerns by people that the money, there's been leakage, etc., etc. There hasn't been. And I think it's, you know, the council and the staff and should be congratulated for making sure that didn't happen. So in relation to item 9.5, desktop review of the council's special rate variation, I would move that the officer's recommendation on page 87 of the business paper 1 and 2, A, B and C, be carried. Move that and declare it carried. Thank you. Investment report.
Thank you, Mr. May. Back to the Deputy Chief Financial Officer. Thank you.
This report presents Council's investment portfolio as at 30th of June 2022 with a closing balance of $203.6 million. All investments have been made in accordance with legislation and council policy. The return on council's investment portfolio for the year was $1.197 million, which was only $3,000 below budget for the year.
Those who are now being affected by mortgage increases wouldn't be all that happy, but these has got the council back on track with the budget predictions pretty well, so, you know, congratulations. In relation to item 9.6, the investment report, I'd move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 224 of the business paper and declare that carried. 9.7 Resilience Grant Application.
Thank you, Mr. May. Group Manager, Corporate and Community Services will introduce this item.
Thank you, General Manager. This report seeks council support for a grant application to the Disaster Risk Reduction Fund for local and regional risk reduction stream. The primary objective of the grant program is to deliver direct disaster risk reduction solutions that promote collaboration between local communities, councils and other stakeholders. Council is seeking funding for a multi-function electric vehicle which will assist in facilitating community place-based engagement to identify specific natural hazard risks, to support the development of community-led emergency risk management plans, to identify specific natural hazard related concerns to inform future mitigation funding opportunities and future capital work plans. While the vehicle is intended for risk reduction programs in the first instance, there is also other possibilities for community consultation, education and program delivery to schools, industry, community organisation and business groups. It will also have the capability to function as a self-powered mobile recovery hub for immediate response in disaster. The grant application builds on community consultation undertaken during the recovery period of the Black Summer fires and ongoing outreach work by council officers and feedback received during the recent executive listening tour.
Thanks for that. In relation to item 9.7, Resilience Grant Application, I'd move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 232 of the business paper and declare that carried. 9.8, Lease, corner of Kangaloo and Hordens Road, Bowral.
Thank you, Mr. May. The Coordinator Property Services will introduce this item. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr. May, there is currently a road lease in place for placement of an advertising sign for Milton Park Country House within the road reserve at the corner of Kangaloo Road and Hordens Road, Bowral. That road lease is due for renewal, and Milton Park have requested a lease be entered into to allow for the advertising sign to remain in place. An independent valuation has been obtained to set rental payments, and the proposed lease will be publicly advertised. This report is now submitted for resolution to enter into a new 5-year road lease.
Thanks for that. In relation to item 9.8, proposed lease of the road reserve, I'd move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 236 of the business paper, 1, 2 and 3, and declare that carried. Item 9.9, renewal of lease at the Resource Recovery Centre.
Coordinator Property Services will introduce this one as well. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr. May, Resource Recovery Australia currently have a lease for the Reviver Centre located within the Resource Recovery Centre at Berrima Road, Mossvale. The lease was for an initial period of 5 years with a 5-year option. The lease is due to expire in March 2023. This report recommends Council enter into a further 12-month lease to enable Council time to finalise a master plan and waste strategy for the Resource Recovery Centre and any associated policies. As a council property is classified operational, there is no legislative requirement for Council to advertise the proposed lease. This matter is now referred to Council for resolution.
I don't know whether you'll be able to answer this question. Maybe the Director can. Is this going to be long enough to get a business plan finished for the resource recovery? It will be. Thank you.
Yeah.
In relation to item 9.9, lease of Resource Recovery Centre, or a section of the Resource Recovery Centre, I'd move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 241 of the business paper 1 and 2 and declare that carried. Penrose Community Hall.
Thank you, Mr. May. The Acting Manager Business Services, who wears a couple of hats, will be introducing this item. Thank you, Mr. McAllister.
Thank you, General Manager. The purpose of this report is to inform Council of the governance and funding arrangements associated with the contract for the construction of the new Penrose Community Hall, as resolved at the May Extraordinary Council meeting. The Penrose Community Association are the entity responsible for managing the construction project. The report outlines the controls in place to ensure that the project is executed and managed in a transparent and efficient manner, including decision-making protocols, a project control group, procurement and contract management, financial management, and also to ensure that Council's $400,000 contribution will be managed and acquitted in a transparent manner. It is proposed that a funding agreement be entered into between the Penrose Community Association and Council.
Thanks for that. Look, this really aligns with the tender evaluation report as well. I worry about the Penrose Community Hall based on the experience of the council with escalation of costs. And I want to make it very clear to everybody that the $400,000 is it. That's how much the council is putting forward as far as I'm concerned. And I think that's very fair and reasonable. So having said that, in relation to 9.10, the Penrose Community Hall, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 246 of the business paper 1 and 2 and declare that carried. Next item is the tender evaluation report.
The Acting Manager Business Services will introduce this item, and I was just looking at the list, so I think you've got the next 5. Been a bit busy. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. This report advises Council of the tender outcomes and the evaluation process that was undertaken for the construction and design of the new Penrose Community Hall, and to seek endorsement from Council on the recommendations contained within the attached tender evaluation report. In summary, the evaluation team considers that given all tenders exceed the project budget, that all tenders are declined and direct negotiations are undertaken with 2 tenderers, being Edwards and Greenwich, for the construction of the new Penrose Community Hall.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the project manager for this is not the council, it's Public Works Advisory, as determined by authorities higher than us.
That is correct.
We have a seat at the table. Are you confident there will be a realistic outcome?
By undertaking this process, we can look at refining the scope and also work with the successful tenderers in regards to managing their risks that may be driving up the price.
Thanks. And the community at Penrose, who have suffered badly during the fires, they're on board with what the process is being followed at the moment. They understand what's happening.
The Penrose Community Association in particular has had extensive consultation across the community, and the history of the design of the hall has been heavily evolved based upon that consultation.
Oh, look, I think the community organisation has been congratulated for getting the grant in the first place, and it's not their fault that building costs have gone mad in a way, but so long as they're understanding realistically that there's going to have to be some concessions. Yes, they understand that?
They understand that, and they are also seeking other grant opportunities to reduce funds.
That's good news. Okay, in relation to item 9.1, the Penrose Community Hall, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 283 of the business paper 1, 2, 3 and 4 and declare that carried. 9.12 bulky waste review.
Mr. May, the purpose of this report is to present to Council a review of the 2022 bulky waste collection service and provide recommendations to improve the service in 2023. Commencing in January 2022, Council provided a bulky waste clean-up collection service for all residents that have a domestic waste service. The project experienced delays due to weather, road closures and COVID. This resulted in the rubbish that was presented to the curbside not being collected for many weeks. A high participation rate of 85% of eligible households was recorded, and the high participation rate is most likely due to it being the first time that the bulky waste service had been offered free of charge. The bulky waste clean-up resulted in 1,265 tonne of waste to landfill, 192 tonne of metal that was recycled, and 1,880 mattresses that have also been recycled. The initial estimate for the project, or in providing the bulky waste service in the 2021-22 financial year, was 1.4 million. The actual realised costs only amounted to 945,000, and the true cost after the sale of the recycled metal only amounted to 870,000. An online bulky waste survey seeking feedback was available for the community from the 30th of May to the 14th of June. The survey also received a lot of interest, with over 1,200 residents completing the survey. The survey results offer insight into what aspects of the bulky waste service are valued by the community, and that the preference is for a scheduled curbside bulky waste service at no extra cost to the residents. Key recommendations for 2023 collection are a reduction in the size of the collection areas. This will result in a shorter time that rubbish is actually presented on the curb before collection, and will also allow targeted resident communications based upon that smaller collection area. Adherence to the 2 cubic metres per household, limiting mattresses to 1 per household, and improvements in contractor reporting and technology.
Thanks for this. Nobody ever said this was going to be free. It would come out of the domestic waste service charge, and having regard to the fact that it hadn't happened for some years, and I'm very conscious that the decision was taken, if there was 3 metres, just take it, because people haven't had this for a long time. And the fact that some of it ended up washed down creeks, which had to go and collect because of the rain, and that was no one's fault. I think this is a job well done, and I think the council staff and the contractors should be very proud of themselves. I've never asked this question before, but I think any survey that has 1,200 residents participating is also an acknowledgement of the fact that this was appreciated. The next item I know the item further on deals with the desktop review of the existing contract, and you make it pretty clear there that when you get a tender, there will be options in relation to this curbside. I think you're going to have difficulty talking residents out of what they're getting now, but that will depend on how the costs come back. But anything that has a participation rate of 80%, and it wasn't a good idea, I think is a good idea, and it's been appreciated. So again, I congratulate the council staff. I do think that I agree totally that the zones were far too big and the rubbish was out there for too long, but I think the residents certainly lived with that and accepted it, having regard to the circumstances. So in relation to item 9.12, the bulky waste collection, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 305 of the business paper, 1, 2, and I'd like to add a 3. All staff and the contractors be thanked. All staff involved in the planning and the contractors be thanked. And declare that Carried. Now move on, disposal of the shredded organic waste. Page 339.
Yep, thank you, Mr Mayor. To the Acting Manager, Business Services.
Thank you, General Manager. The purpose of this report is to seek council approval to enact the contract extension option with Australian Native Landscapes Proprietary Limited for the transport and disposal of shredded organic waste. The current contract has one 2-year extension option that can be exercised at council's discretion. The extension of the contract will provide green waste transport and disposal services until the new contract as part of Project 24 commences in June 2024.
Thanks for that. An unrelated question, but as you drive past the Resource Recovery Centre, there is still a huge pile of mattresses. I know it's unrelated to this, but they're disappearing. They're being recycled, and best you can, they're just waiting now for a contractor, eh? Or
Unfortunately, the collection method with mattresses damaged a lot of mattresses, and which meant our existing contractor was not able to process or recycle those mattresses. We have now sourced an alternate provider for all of those damaged mattresses, and they will be removed in the coming month.
so you'll be doing your best to ensure that as much is recycled as possible.
They will all be recycled.
Well done. I know, sorry about that, it's unrelated, but I think the community needs to know, because as they drive past, they'd see the pile as well as I have, and it's good that you're taking your time to make sure that they're just not landfilled, which would have been the easy option, and probably cheaper. In relation to item 9.13, transport and disposal of shredded organic waste, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 339 of the business paper and declare that carried. Desktop review.
And to the Acting Manager, Business Services. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. The purpose of this report is to provide Council with an overview of the current waste management services provided by J.R. Richards and identifies opportunities to improve internal processes and the waste services for residents. Council has conducted several reviews of waste services over the last 5 years. Despite these numerous reviews, it appears minimal recommendations have been implemented and embedded into practice. The opportunities have been separated for implementation into the current contract, while others are to be implemented in the new curbside collection contract that is due to start in July 2024. In order to ensure that these future waste services are appropriate for Wingecarribee residents, extensive community consultation will be required in the development of these tender specifications for the contract.
When dealing with the consultation with residents, the residents who have contacted us, the 1,200, is that information captured, or is that, Mr. Crawford, is that possible to capture that information? The 1,200 people who came back to us about the curbside collection, would you have all their email addresses, or we don't keep that?
Mr. May, we have been trialling internally the new CRM system now for approximately 3 months. I'd have to go take it on notice and check, because we do have that information being recorded. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I asked the wrong person.
Sorry, no, it's okay. A lot of that has come in through, you'll say, Wingecarribee. So that requires most people to have to register to fill out the survey. Sometimes they can be anonymous, but for the majority, we would have their contact details.
One of the, and I've spoken to you about this before, and one of the big issues when I go around the villages, especially the location villages rather than villages, is they don't get a collection service. And you've told me about some of the options that you are potentially, innovatively, I must say, looking at. And I know the listening tour as well. I think people best described as east of the pie shop at Robinson have been very vocal and there's quite a number of the villages, so it may be an idea if you could use that information to get information from the 1200 to get more information out. This is going to be a long contract for the new contract, so we've got to make sure we get it right, and it'll happen while I'm still here. So I'm going to be asking a lot of questions on behalf of residents. So I just would suggest that. I'm not at all devaluing the work you've already done. I think that's fabulous. I'm just saying that we've got to make sure that we engage with the community in getting an outcome, because they're going to live with it for a long time. In relation to item 9.4, desktop review of the J.R. Richards curbside waste collection contract, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 342 of the business paper 1, 2 and 3, and declare that carried. 9.15, 369.
Thank you, Mr. May. Before I ask the Acting Manager Business Services to talk to this item, I'd just like to highlight, and this is his final item for tonight or this afternoon, just highlight the amount of work that Mr. McAllister and his team have undertaken to prepare these, research and prepare these reports and programs. And also just to highlight the growing focus that we're having on resource management and the management of the recycling centre. So over to you, Mr. McAllister.
Thank you, General Manager. The purpose of this report is to inform Council of the tender process undertaken for the removal of 1,240 tonnes of soil that is currently stockpiled at the Resource Recovery Centre, and seek endorsement for the engagement of the preferred contractor. A tender process was undertaken between the 24th of May until the 21st of June, receiving 8 tender responses. Based on the evaluation team considers that Landtrack New South Wales Proprietary Limited have adequate capacity and capability and offer the best value for money for the services tendered to Council.
Look, I would join with the General Manager in thanking you and your team. You obviously don't do it all yourself. You have a team assisting you, but they need leadership, and the Director obviously also provides that leadership. One must be very careful in an organisation like this to give too much credit to one area when so many areas are working so hard. But I think at the last meeting I said you're a breath of fresh air in what's being achieved. So if other managers and directors and the General Manager take on board that you're just not being singled out, everyone is working very hard, but it's just that you've got a lot of reports coming to Council, and nearly everything that you are dealing with impacts on residents. And I think I'm pretty comfortable in saying, well done, and keep it up. In relation to item 9.15, removal and disposal of non-protestable general waste, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 369 of the business paper 1, 2 and 3, and declare that carried. 9.16, you can have a rest now. 9.16 Rural Fire Service.
Thank you, Mr. May. Manager Assets, Mr. Robinson, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, the purpose of this report is to provide Council with an update on the delivery of the Rural Fire Service water storage tank program and to seek endorsement of the 3-stage implementation program proposed. The program seeks to install 100 kilolitres of water storage in strategic locations to support our villages that aren't connected to the water supply network. The program is entirely reliant on grant funding opportunities, and the stages have been developed upon consideration of the grant funding constraints, the development approval pathways and land availability. The successful delivery of the RFS water storage tank program will assist firefighting efforts during both fire prevention and active wildfire events, and so will further increase the resilience of our more remote villages.
Thanks for this. It's complicated, isn't it? Just building a water tank, and the government's changed the rules since we put the grants in, applications for the grants, which makes it even more complicated. I have one addition to the recommendation, and that relates to Medway. The Medway residents indicated that they would like a tank, but there was a whole package of stuff that we met. I think I'm going to their meeting on Sunday week or Sunday fortnight to have another talk to them. But the rubber has now hit the road, and if they want to be involved, they've got to make some decisions, in my view. So in relation to item 9.16, the Rural Fire Service Water Storage Tanks program, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 373 of the business paper 1, 2 and 3, and add a 4. It be noted the advice in relation to the provision of water storage tank at Medway is subject to agreement being reached with the Medway Residents Association. I think it's very difficult to do anything until there is some agreement, and my reading of it, that will hinge on the outcome of the agreement about the hall, where you're suggesting it is placed, because it's the only option, because they can't go on private property. Having said that, I would move 1, 2, 3 and 4 and declare that carried. The Wingecarribee River Flood Study.
Thank you, Mr. May. Manager Assets.
So the purpose of this report is to seek Council's adoption of the Wingecarribee River Flood Study update. This revision of the flood study was undertaken at the recommendation of the Department of what is now known as the Department of Planning and Environment in order to accommodate the updated Australian rainfall and runoff guidelines, as well as to complete a calibration exercise of the study through using the real-world data from the Water New South Wales stream flow gauges at Bongbong Weir and Berrima Weir. Community consultation was completed as part of the update of the study, and the draft plan has also been publicly exhibited October to November last year. 4 submissions were received during the exhibition, and a response to each has been included within the final report.
Sorry. In relation to, look, it's a massive amount of work in this. In relation to item 9.17, review of the Wingecarribee River Flood Study, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 379 of the business paper and declare it carried. Geographical Names Board.
Back to you, Manager Assets.
Again, the purpose of this report is to provide Council with the results of a community survey undertaken in 2020 in relation to a potential name change for the locality of Balmoral. The matter arose due to concerns relating to the duplication of the locality name at 2 other locations within the state. The duplication of locality names is a legacy matter, with the Geographic Names Board now administering a much more stringent naming and addressing process. And as part of that, they also encouraged local government authorities to consider renaming localities that have duplicate names. The survey results show evidence that the community has experienced confusion and difficulties with the locality name of Balmoral, and so it's therefore recommended that Council submit a proposal to the Geographic Names Board for their consideration of changing the locality name of Balmoral to Balmoral Village.
I've had some experience with the confusion of the name Balmoral, having worked at Mossvale for over 40 years. We used to actually get residents ringing us about correspondence they got that should have gone to up here, and a bit of confusion. So this is a sensible decision in my view, and it's supported by the local community clearly. So in relation to item 9.18, Balmoral Village, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 383 of the business paper 1 and 2 and declare that carried. The Stormwater Management Policy.
Thank you, Mr. May. Before I ask the Manager Assets to introduce this item, just like to thank him for the coordination of preparing this policy and the expertise of the engineers, but also it is an organisational wide policy and has had input from the planning and development area as well. So thank you, Manager Assets.
Thanks. Mr. Mayor, the purpose of this report is to seek Council's adoption of the Stormwater Management Policy. The policy has been structured in an effort to provide a concise summary on the wide-reaching nature of stormwater management. The policy works through the chapters of what is the stormwater network, the different causes of flooding, how Council manages the stormwater network, as well as how will Council then respond to various stormwater inquiries. As a result of the policy, it is expected that the community will experience an improved level of service from Council in relation to the response of stormwater related matters, and also receiving consistency in communication received. It's therefore recommended the Council adopts the Stormwater Management Policy.
Well done with this policy. When I first arrived, I spent a lot of time on inter-allotment drainage, which the council has no role in. But we seem to have burnt over the years a lot of time becoming involved in issues that aren't ours. And I think it's important that residents understand that we can serve notices, but we can't make, we don't have a magic wand to stop water running downhill. Could I suggest, though, this is quite a significant change to how this council operates. This will bring it into line with other councils, how they operate in relation to this area. I'd like to put this on public exhibition for 28 days, just to give people the opportunity of having their say during the administration period. This is going to be happening a lot. I don't want to be seen to be forcing things down people's throats, because I won't be, and I won't be a rubber stamp. That's not to say that I'm suggesting this is, but I just think this would be politic to put it on public exhibition. So I'd move in relation to item 9.1 that the Stormwater Management Policy be placed on public exhibition for 28 days. And I declare that carried. That should be seen in no way as a reflection on the report. I just want to make sure that it's a big change and residents have to be aware why we're doing it. 9.20, the Environmental Program Update.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Manager Environment and Sustainability, Mr. Arthur, will introduce this. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, GM. Mr. Mayor, this report provides an update on Wingecarribee Shire Council's environmental program. The report outlines how the program aligns to the Community Strategic Plan, delivery program and community expectations. This report is a follow-up to the Council resolution made on the 18th of May of this year. Council's environmental program has been developed to address the goals and strategies adopted in the Wingecarribee Shire Council Strategic Plan. Wingecarribee Shire Community Strategic Plan. The attachment to the report has a table which aims to show the line of sight connection between the annual program actions and the long-term CSP goals. Included in the environment program are projects and programs funded by the Environment Levy. The Environment Levy funds a work program that has been approved by IPART and covers the areas of biodiversity conservation, rivers and streams, Sustainability Living Program, community support and program coordination. The Environment Program attracts significant grants and other contributions with approximately $600,000 earmarked for this year. It also has strong partnerships with key agencies such as the Department of Planning and Environment, Biodiversity Conservation Trust and Local Land Services. Through Council's regular community research studies, we understand that the community consistently identifies the natural environment as one of the best aspects of living in the Shire, and the environment contributes to a significant share of the overall satisfaction with Council. There is a passionate sector in the community that advocate and follow environmental interests in the Shire, and this is touched on in the report, especially about how we engage with them. Council works with several community stakeholders, and I'd just like to mention the good work of our bush care volunteers that do amazing work across the Shire.
This is related. The Mount Gibraltar, I got a letter off a lady today about Mount Gibraltar and in effect the Crown Land, I think, up there, which I haven't digested. I've had a lot on my plate today, but I'll get to it. But I have an inkling that the council has resolved to do a plan of management already for Mount Gibraltar. Is that right?
Yep, that is correct. In fact, we've just had a survey on our Yours Say website, and I think it attracted over 214 survey respondents. So we're well and truly started the process. We've engaged with the Bush Care and Land Care group that works up there as well.
Mm.
So the process has started.
A council can't be all things to all people. And where we are now, we need to take smaller mouthfuls to get things done so that we have a council that the community can be very proud of, and that is equipped and mature for when elected members come back. I'm going to move the recommendation, but would it be possible, in a month or so, to spend a day with you, and you could take me around and show me all this work that's being done? I apologise that I had intended to go to that school camp, but I ended up having a Country Mayors Association meeting or something on the same day. But I'd like to spend the day with you and meet some of these volunteers who are working all to acknowledge what they do, but at the same time to familiarise myself. I've had my hands full with other issues, but I think I'd like now to, I'm going to be here for a bit longer, to spend the day with you. Would that be appropriate?
Yep, that'd be a pleasure. Fine by me. And
Okay.
in terms of that schools, we do have another schools program later on in the year too. So depending on the calendar, there might be another opportunity as well.
Oh, that's good. That doesn't need to be put into the recommendation, does it? Yeah. Okay, well, remind me of my commitment. Okay, in relation to item 9.20, Environmental Program Update, I'd move the officer's recommendation on page 411 of the business paper and declare that carried. The Audit and Risk Committee.
Mr. May, we weren't intending to introduce that item.
Okay, it's the minutes of the Audit and Risk Committee. I'd move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 422 of the business paper and declare that carried. The Traffic Committee.
Again, Mr. May, we weren't intending to introduce that item. However, if you have questions, the Director would be happy to answer.
The only question I've got is how come none of the community members are going? Do we need to refresh the community members?
Through you, Mr. May, community members that have expressed a concern in relation to items that are on the agenda of the Traffic Committee are notified. However, if they elect not to attend, that's to their discretion.
My apologies. Where a resident writes and asks for, an 80k zone or whatever, do we put them to the Traffic Committee, or do we have a guideline which sometimes we just say no or sometimes we say yes?
Mr. May, so for the Traffic Committees, for the as per our terms of reference, it's for the consideration of traffic-related matters that have already been considered by Council. So not all traffic-related requests will go to Traffic Committee because a number of them will be, I guess, considered and assessed within the traffic team by the appropriate staff.
So it's the council staff make the calls to a degree based on guidelines issued by the Department of Transport?
To an extent, correct. So for like a lot of events that might require traffic control and approval, they will all go to Traffic Committee for consideration and subsequent recommendation for either approval or adjustment or rejection. For example, but not every parking sign change or line marking request will necessarily go to Traffic Committee. If it's not supported by the council staff, then it wouldn't make it to traffic committee in that sense.
An example, as you go along Mossvale Road, north of Briars, there's that development going on in there, and there's a variety of speed signs. Who monitors that? It's not our road, so it's not our problem, or it is our problem in my view, but...
So it all comes down to the details. So speed zones themselves are a matter for Transport for New South Wales. It's entirely within their delegation. So council doesn't manage speed zones. In terms of traffic control, again, if it's related to a development or a road work, then it would go through the Section 138 process.
So who would have, and this is an opportunity for me to ask the questions, who would have approved what has gone on that road? The Traffic Committee or Transport for New South Wales, or is it a partnership?
My understanding is that it would be Transport for New South Wales because it's a state road.
Can I respectfully suggest you ring them tomorrow and tell them to go for a drive? The work's finished and there's conflicting signage on the road. I do it sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, and I just think that residents must think, what's this council up to? But it's not us. But the council's a slow-moving target and tends to get the blame. I just think it'd be worthwhile having a look.
Just to add to what the manager assets has said, this matter has come up before, and we'll take your feedback on notice. We have had previous discussions with Transport, and we'll take up the points that you've raised this evening.
Well, in fairness, this hasn't been raised by a resident. It's raised by a visitor who's going to be here till 2024. And, you know, I just think Transport for New South Wales could do better, to be quite frank.
Sorry, Mr. May, it has been raised by some residents as well, so we'll take that up. Thank you.
Thanks. I will do that again, I'm sorry then. In relation to the Traffic Committee, I would move the recommendation as outlined on page 443 of the business paper, 1, 2 and 3, and declare that carried. There is a late item, so I would move that standing orders be suspended to consider one supplementary item and declare that carried. I would now move that in accordance with clause 9.13b of the Code of Meeting Practice, it be considered a matter of urgency, lease to Southern Highlands Bridge Club of land forming part of David Wood's playing fields at Broadman Road, Bowral, and the lease to the Southern Highlands Bridge Club of land forming part of David Wood's playing field at Broadman Road, Bowral, and declare that carried. General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May. The Chief Information Officer, who's acting for the Director, will introduce this item. Thank you.
Before I commence the introduction into the report, Mr. May, I need to advise of a date error in the background section of the report stating that Council declined funding on the 8th of December 2022. This should read the 8th of December 2021. At a meeting held on the 24th of October 2018, Council resolved to enter into a 21-year lease with the Southern Highlands Bridge Club Incorporated for the occupation of part of David Wood's playing fields and to construct a clubhouse. During the public exhibition period, a number of objections were received, and as a result, the proposed lease was referred to the Minister of Local Government and ministerial consent was received in October 2019. At a Finance Committee meeting held on the 17th of February 2021, Council reviewed a request for a safety net funding agreement in the amount of $470,000 over a term of 10 years from the Southern Bridge Club Incorporated for the construction of a new clubhouse facility to be located on council-owned land at David Wood's playing field, East Barrel, and submitted a planned repayment schedule over a 10-year period having regard for the for their income in the years preceding the COVID pandemic. The Finance Committee meeting minutes were taken to the Council on the 10th of March 2021 and passed, except for any resolution that had an unfunded budgetary implications was to be sent back to the Finance Committee for consideration. Before this could occur, Council was placed into administration. On the 8th of December 2021, Council resolved to decline the request from the Bridge Club for a loan of $470,000 and resolved that we would reimburse them for reasonable costs. On the 8th of December 2021, Council resolved to reimburse reasonable costs, and since this meeting, there has been numerous discussions with the Bridge Club, and it has been determined with Council will make a one-off payment of $154,183 to cover the costs incurred by the Bridge Club when acting on good faith on the resolution of Council, and as a result agreed to terminate the lease on David Wood's playing sports fields. Initial negotiations have been undertaken with the Mossvale Golf Club and the Bridge Club, and they are proposing to commit the funds to the refurbishment of the premises at Mossvale Golf Club in exchange for a lease of the space. It's currently envisioned that the initial lease will be for a period of 6 years, which the Bridge Club consider an acceptable term for the proposal of the investment. To date, the Bridge Club and Golf Club have had 4 meetings and have agreed it would be a good fit and benefits both organisations. Those conversations remain ongoing.
The recommendations is a one-off payment of $150,000.
Apologies, Mr. May, that'll have to be changed to reflect it. It should be $154,183. Oh, sorry, it's 150. Sorry, my apologies.
No. Okay. Look, for the record, I'll make it very clear that I've also had meetings with the Bridge Club. And that's not in the report. So just for transparency, they sought a meeting with me to understand where I was coming from, and I met with them. This may sound like $150,000, a lot of money, but in my view, it's the cost of stupidity of the council agreeing to lease what I consider to be important public open space for 99 years, I think it was. 99? 21. For 21 years, which again, after it's gone, you won't get it back. So I met with them and we had long discussions, and I told them that I was not in a position to take the matter further, but they would do best to speak to the staff and the general manager, which happened. Having said that, I was led to believe that the agreement with the Mossvale Golf Club was for 10 years, rent-free, and that they would then have an option for another 10 years, which I said to them, be very careful because you want to make sure that you have a agreement with the club for the next 10 years at a community-based rental. And this is not what is reflected in this recommendation. So I have difficulty in supporting it. The council has a role to play in the public interest and the community interest, in my view, in this matter, because it is not their fault that the council went into administration and that the general manager identified problems associated with the loan, and I have...
So that's correct, Mr. May. When we met with representatives from the Bridge Club, they indicated it was a 10-year lease on a community rate with the Mossvale Golf Club, with the potential for an additional 10 years option.
Well, look, I obviously want this to go forward, and I think there would be potentially opportunities for the council, if we can get this land back, to possibly, and I've spoken to the local member about the potential for a playground in this area, and I think, is there Anything you can add to that, Director, or?
Through you, Mr. May, that's what we're planning at the moment, for a playground to go there.
So a kid's playground would replace a bridge club, which is a more acceptable use for the land in my view. Well, look, I'm going to move that delegated authority be granted to the General Manager to action the officer's recommendation, subject to the General Manager being satisfied that any lease arrangements between the Mossvale Golf Club and the Southern Highlands Bridge Club are in the community interest. Are you satisfied? You know where I'm coming from, I know where you're coming from, and I think we align. So it'll be over to you. So in relation to that, I would move that in relation to item 1.1 of the supplementary agenda, that delegated authority be granted to the General Manager to action the officer's recommendation, subject to the General Manager being satisfied that any lease arrangements between the Mossvale Golf Club and the Southern Highlands Bridge Club are in the community interest. And I would declare that carried. Is there any further? Thank you. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.